Margaret Wilson drove on the empty road at night. She worked as a nurse at the city hospital and was going home after her late shift. The road was dark and quiet. There were no other cars around. Margaret was tired but happy to go home and rest. She thought about her son Michael. He was a police officer just like his father had been. Margaret felt proud of her son. He worked hard to keep people safe. Her husband James had been a police officer too. He died 3 years ago while doing his job. Since then, Margaret lived alone in their small house on Oak Street. The night was peaceful until Margaret saw flashing lights in her mirror. Blue and red lights blinked behind her car. A police car was signaling for her to stop. Margaret was confused. She was not driving too fast. She was following all the rules of the road. She pulled her car to the side of the road. Her heart beat faster. Even though she had done nothing wrong, Margaret always felt nervous when stopped by police. It was just her nature to worry. Through her mirror, Margaret saw a young officer get out of the police car. He walked slowly to her car window. His hand rested on his gun belt. Margaret rolled down her window and waited. The officer came closer. When he saw Margaret, his face changed. He started to smile in a way that made Margaret feel uncomfortable. It was not a friendly smile. It was a smile that made her feel small. The officer looked at Margaret for a long time before speaking. His name tag said Officer Donovan. "License and registration, ma'am," Officer Donovan said. His voice had a tone that Margaret did not like. "May I ask why you stopped me, officer?" Margaret asked. Her voice was calm and polite. She had been taught to always be respectful to police. Officer Donovan laughed a little. "You were moving between lanes. Have you been drinking tonight?" Margaret was shocked by this question. "No, sir. I do not drink. I am coming home from my job at the hospital. I am a nurse." The officer laughed again. "Sure you are. I hear all kinds of stories from people I stop. Let me see your papers." Margaret felt her face get hot. She did not like being called a liar. But she stayed calm. She reached for her purse to get her license. "I need your car registration too," said Officer Donovan. Margaret nodded. She reached over to open her glove box. The car registration was kept there. As she opened the small door, her hands were shaking. She was tired and upset by the way the officer was treating her. The glove box was full of papers. As Margaret reached in to find her registration, several things fell out. Her insurance papers, car manual, and a small metal object dropped to the floor of the car. The metal object made a loud sound as it hit. Officer Donovan pointed his flashlight at the floor of the car. His eyes got wide when he saw what had fallen. It was a police badge. The metal caught the light and shined brightly. "What is that?" Officer Donovan asked in a sharp voice. "Where did you get a police badge? Are you stealing police property?" Margaret looked at the badge on the floor. She knew exactly what it was and why it was in her car. But before she could explain, Officer Donovan's face changed again. Now he looked angry. "That badge belongs to my son," Margaret said. "He is a police detective. His name is Michael Wilson." Officer Donovan laughed loudly. "Sure, lady. And I am the President of the United States. Do you expect me to believe that?" Margaret took a deep breath. She was tired of the officer's attitude. "My son is Detective Michael Wilson. He works for the county sheriff department. That is his backup badge. Sometimes he keeps it in my car when we go places together." Officer Donovan shook his head. "Do you know it is against the law to have a police badge if you are not an officer? This is serious." "I told you the truth," Margaret said. Her voice was getting shaky. "My son is a police officer. My husband was Sergeant James Wilson. He died 3 years ago while serving on the city police force." The officer's smile got bigger. "Listen, lady, I do not know what game you are playing, but pretending to be related to police officers is not going to help you." Margaret was shocked. "I am not pretending. Please call your sergeant. Anyone in your department will know my family." "Step out of the car," Officer Donovan said suddenly. "What? Why?" Margaret asked. "I said step out of the car now." The officer's hand moved to his gun. Margaret was scared now. She did not understand why this was happening. Slowly, she unbuckled her seatbelt and opened her door. The night air was cold against her skin. She was wearing her nurse uniform, which was not warm enough for the cool night. "Turn around and put your hands on the car," Officer Donovan ordered. "This is not right," Margaret said, but she did what she was told. She turned and placed her hands on the roof of her car. Officer Donovan began to pat her down as if looking for weapons. Margaret felt humiliated. She had never been treated like this before. As this was happening, another police car pulled up behind them. Its lights were flashing too. Margaret felt a small bit of hope. Maybe this new officer would listen to her. The door of the second police car opened. An older officer stepped out. He was tall with gray hair showing under his police hat. He walked toward Margaret and Officer Donovan. "What is going on here, Donovan?" the older officer asked. Officer Donovan stood up straight. "I pulled this woman over for bad driving. She had a police badge in her car. I think she stole it." The older officer looked at Margaret. His eyes got wide with recognition. "Margaret Wilson, is that you?" Margaret felt tears come to her eyes. "Yes, Frank, it's me." The older officer shook his head. "Donovan, do you know who this is?" "This is Margaret Wilson. Her husband was Sergeant James Wilson. He died in the line of duty 3 years ago. Her son is Detective Michael Wilson." Officer Donovan's face went pale. I did not know, sir." Sergeant Frank Miller looked angry. "Why is she out of her car? What are you doing?" "I thought she stole the badge," Officer Donovan said. His voice was quiet now. "She was driving badly." Sergeant Miller shook his head. "I checked your dash camera feed when I saw who you pulled over. She was driving perfectly fine." Officer Donovan had no answer. He looked at the ground. Sergeant Miller turned to Margaret. "I am so sorry about this, Margaret. Are you okay?" Margaret nodded. "I am fine, Frank. Thank you for coming. I saw the stop on the system. When I realized it was you, I came right away. I know you would never break any laws." Margaret was grateful for Sergeant Miller. He had been her husband's partner for many years. After James died, Frank had checked on her and Michael often. "You can get back in your car now, Margaret," Sergeant Miller said kindly. "Do you want me to follow you home?" "No, thank you. I can drive myself." Margaret got back into her car. Through the window, she heard Sergeant Miller talking to Officer Donovan. "You will report to my office first thing tomorrow morning. We need to have a serious talk about your conduct tonight." Margaret drove home with a heavy heart. The incident had shaken her. She had always trusted and respected police officers. Her husband had been one. Her son was one. But tonight made her see that not all officers were like her husband and son. When she got home, Margaret made herself some tea. She sat at her kitchen table thinking about what happened. She wondered if Officer Donovan would have treated her differently if she had been white. The thought made her sad. Margaret did not sleep well that night. When morning came, she called her son Michael. She told him what had happened. "Mom, I am so sorry," Michael said. "That should never have happened to you or anyone else." "It's not your fault, honey," Margaret said. "But it makes me think about how some people are treated by police." "I know, Mom. That's why I became an officer. Dad always said we need good people wearing the badge. People who will treat everyone with respect." Margaret smiled. Her son was so much like his father. Both good men who wanted to make a difference. Later that day, Michael came to visit her. They sat at the kitchen table just like when he was young. Michael told her that Officer Donovan had been suspended while the department investigated the incident. "But that's not enough, Mom," Michael said. "We need better training, better screening of who becomes an officer. Dad always said the badge is only as good as the person wearing it." Margaret nodded. "Your father was a wise man. The chief wants to talk to you, Mom. He wants to hear about what happened from you. Would you be willing to do that?" Margaret thought about it. Her first reaction was to say no, to try to forget the whole thing. But then she thought about other people who might be treated the same way or worse. "Yes," she said. "I will talk to the chief. If my story can help make things better, then I should tell it." The next day, Margaret went to the police station. She had not been there since James died. Walking through the doors brought back memories of picking him up after his shift or bringing him lunch on long days. The desk sergeant recognized her immediately. "Mrs. Wilson, so good to see you. The chief is expecting you." Margaret was led to the chief's office. Chief Thomas had been in charge when James was on the force. He stood up when Margaret entered the room. "Margaret, thank you for coming in," Chief Thomas said. He shook her hand and offered her a seat. "I am deeply sorry about what happened the other night." "Thank you, Chief," Margaret said. "I appreciate that. I want to hear everything that happened from your perspective. Take your time and tell me everything you remember." Margaret told the story from the beginning. She talked about being pulled over, about Officer Donovan's attitude and comments, about how frightened she felt when he made her get out of the car. The chief listened without interrupting. He took notes as she spoke. When Margaret finished her story, Chief Thomas shook his head. "This is not acceptable. Not for any citizen, and especially not for the family of one of our fallen officers." "What will happen to Officer Donovan?" Margaret asked. "He is suspended for now. There will be a full investigation, but I can tell you he will not be back on patrol anytime soon. At minimum, he will need extensive retraining." Margaret nodded. She did not want Officer Donovan to lose his job. She just wanted him to learn and do better. "There is something else I wanted to talk to you about," Chief Thomas said. "We are starting a new training program for our officers. It's about community relations and treating all citizens with respect. I would like you to speak to our officers as part of this training." "Me?" Margaret was surprised. "What would I say?" "Your perspective is valuable. You are the widow of an officer and the mother of another, but you also experienced being treated unfairly by police. Your voice could make a real difference." Margaret considered the offer. She had never been one to speak in public, but she thought about how her story might help other officers understand the impact of their actions. "I will do it," she said. "If it helps even one officer think twice about how they treat people, then it's worth it." Chief Thomas smiled. "Thank you, Margaret. James would be proud of you." On her way out of the station, Margaret passed the Wall of Honor. James's picture hung there with other officers who had died in the line of duty. She stopped for a moment to look at his face, his kind eyes, his warm smile. "I'm trying to make a difference, James," she whispered, "just like you taught us." That evening, Margaret called Michael to tell him about her meeting with the chief. "Mom, that's amazing," Michael said. "Your story could really help change things." "I hope so," Margaret said. "I'm nervous about speaking to all those officers, though." "You'll do great, Mom. Just speak from your heart." That's what Dad would say. 2 weeks later, Margaret stood in front of a room full of police officers. Some were veterans who had known James. Others were new to the force. Officer Donovan sat in the back row. He looked uncomfortable, but he was there. Margaret took a deep breath and began to speak. "My name is Margaret Wilson. My husband was Sergeant James Wilson, who served on this force for 20 years before he was killed in the line of duty. My son is Detective Michael Wilson, who serves with the County Sheriff's Department. I have always respected and supported the police." The room was quiet. All eyes were on Margaret. 2 weeks ago, I was driving home from my night shift at the hospital. I am a nurse. I was pulled over by an officer who treated me with disrespect and suspicion from the moment he saw me. Margaret did not look at Officer Donovan. She did not want to embarrass him. This was not about him personally. It was about something bigger. When my son's badge fell from my glove compartment, the situation got worse. The officer did not believe me when I explained who I was. He made me get out of my car. He searched me on the side of the road in the middle of the night while I was still in my nurse uniform. Some of the older officers shook their heads. They looked upset by what they were hearing. I was scared that night, not just for myself, but for what it meant. If I could be treated that way even with my connections to the police, what happens to people who don't have those connections? Margaret paused to take a drink of water. Her hands were shaking a little, but her voice was strong. My husband James believed that wearing a badge was a responsibility, not a right. He believed that how you treat people matters more than how many arrests you make. He taught our son that respect has to be given to be received. The officers were listening carefully. Even Officer Donovan was paying close attention now. I am not here to point fingers or place blame. I am here because I believe in what good police officers do every day. I believe in the oath my husband took and that my son takes seriously. I believe things can get better. Chief Thomas stood up and joined Margaret at the front of the room. Mrs. Wilson has agreed to be part of our community relations training program. She will share her perspectives and experiences with each new class of officers. I expect everyone to learn from what she has to teach us. After the presentation, many officers came to speak to Margaret. Some had tears in their eyes. Others thanked her for her honesty. A few shared stories of their own experiences with being treated unfairly before they became officers. As the room emptied, Officer Donovan approached Margaret. He looked nervous. Mrs. Wilson, I want to apologize for how I treated you that night. I was wrong, and I am truly sorry. Margaret looked at the young officer. She could see he was sincere. Thank you for saying that, Officer Donovan. I accept your apology. I've been doing a lot of thinking these past 2 weeks. I want to be a better officer. The kind your husband and son are. Were you listening today? Margaret asked. Yes, ma'am. Every word. Then you've already started becoming that better officer. Over the next few months, Margaret became a regular speaker at the police academy. New officers learned from her story. She worked with trainers to develop better ways to teach about community relations. The program began to get attention from other police departments in nearby cities. Michael was proud of his mother's work. You're making a real difference, Mom. Officers who go through your training program are showing better judgment on the street. Margaret smiled. I never thought I would be doing something like this, but it feels right. Dad would think so too, Michael said. One evening, Margaret was shopping at the grocery store when a young woman approached her. Excuse me, are you Mrs. Wilson, the one who speaks at the police academy? Margaret was surprised to be recognized. Yes, I am. The woman had tears in her eyes. I wanted to thank you. My brother was stopped by police last month. The officer who stopped him had been through your program. My brother said the officer treated him with respect, even though there was a misunderstanding. Things could have gone very differently. Margaret was touched. Thank you for telling me that. It means a lot to know the program is helping. News of the training program spread. A reporter from the local newspaper asked to interview Margaret. The story ran on the front page with the headline, Police Widow Helps Build Bridges Between Officers and Community. Chief Thomas called Margaret after the article was published. The mayor wants to meet you. He's interested in expanding your program to all city departments, not just police. All city departments. I don't know if my story applies beyond police work. It's about treating people with dignity, Margaret. That applies everywhere. The meeting with the mayor went well. Soon Margaret was speaking to city workers in every department. Her message was always the same. Respect matters, dignity matters, how you treat people matters. Officer Donovan had become one of her strongest supporters. After his suspension ended, he requested to be assigned to community policing. He walked a beat in neighborhoods where relations with police had been tense. Slowly, he built trust with residents. One day, Officer Donovan called Margaret. Mrs. Wilson, I have a situation I could use your help with. There's a community meeting tonight. People are upset about some recent incidents. Would you come with me? Margaret agreed. The meeting was held at a local church. The room was packed with concerned citizens. Many were angry. They shouted questions and demands at the police officers present. Officer Donovan stood up. I want to introduce someone who helped me understand what real policing should be. This is Mrs. Margaret Wilson. Margaret had not planned to speak, but she saw the need to help calm the situation. She stood and faced the crowd. I understand your anger. 3 years ago, I lost my husband, who was a police sergeant. Last year, I was mistreated during a traffic stop by an officer who judged me based on the color of my skin. I know both sides of this issue. The room grew quieter as people listened to Margaret's story. Change is possible, but it takes work from everyone. The police department is making real changes in how officers are trained. I have seen it firsthand. But they need your help too. They need your voice, your participation, your willingness to work together. By the end of the meeting, people were talking instead of shouting. Plans were made for regular meetings between community leaders and police representatives. It was a small step, but an important one. A year passed. Margaret's program had grown beyond what anyone expected. Police departments from across the state sent officers to learn from her. She was invited to speak at the State Police Academy. Michael had been promoted to sergeant. He led a special unit focused on community policing. His team worked in neighborhoods building relationships before problems occurred. Officer Donovan was no longer a rookie. He had become a respected officer known for his fair treatment of all citizens. He often partnered with community organizations to solve problems before they required police action. One day, Chief Thomas called Margaret with exciting news. "The governor has heard about your program. He wants to make it a requirement for all police departments in the state. He's proposing legislation to fund it." Margaret was overwhelmed. "I never imagined it would go this far." "You started something important, Margaret. James would be so proud." The legislation was called the Wilson Initiative in honor of James. It required all police officers in the state to receive training in community relations, bias awareness, and respectful interaction. Margaret testified before the state legislature about her experiences. "This is not about being soft on crime," she told the lawmakers. "This is about being smart about policing. Officers who have the trust of their communities get more cooperation. They solve more crimes. They make everyone safer." The bill passed with broad support from both political parties. News organizations from across the country covered the story. Margaret found herself giving interviews to national television programs. Through it all, she remained humble. "I'm just a nurse and a mother who wants to make things better," she would say when people praised her work. Michael worried that his mother was working too hard. "Mom, you need to take care of yourself too. Dad wouldn't want you wearing yourself out." Margaret smiled at her son's concern. "I'm fine, honey. This work gives me purpose. After your father died, I felt lost. Now I feel like I'm carrying on his legacy in my own way." On the anniversary of James's death, Margaret visited his grave. She placed fresh flowers and sat on the small bench nearby. "Well, James, our son, is following in your footsteps. He's a sergeant now. And somehow I've become an advocate for better policing. Life takes strange turns, doesn't it?" A gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the tree that shaded the grave. Margaret felt peaceful. "I think you would approve of what I'm doing. You always said the badge is only as good as the heart of the person wearing it. I'm trying to help officers develop those good hearts." As she sat there lost in thought, Margaret heard footsteps. She turned to see Officer Donovan approaching with flowers of his own. "Mrs. Wilson, I hope I'm not intruding. I wanted to pay my respects to Sergeant Wilson. I never met him, but I feel like I know him through you and your son." Margaret was touched by the gesture. "Thank you, Officer Donovan. Please join me." Officer Donovan placed his flowers next to Margaret's. "I come here sometimes when I need to remember why I became an officer. Your husband's example means a lot to me, even though we never met." "That would make him happy to hear," Margaret said. James believed in mentoring the next generation of officers. He would have been pleased to note his influence continues. The Wilson Initiative began to show results across the state. Complaints against police officers decreased. Community satisfaction with police services improved. Other states took notice and began to develop similar programs. Margaret was invited to Washington, D.C. to meet with national law enforcement leaders. They wanted to learn from her experience and possibly create a national version of her program. Michael drove her to the airport. "Mom, you've come so far from that night when you were pulled over." "Life is strange that way," Margaret said. "Sometimes the worst experiences lead to the most positive changes." In Washington, Margaret met with the heads of several federal law enforcement agencies. She told her story and explained how the training program worked. The officials were impressed by the simplicity and effectiveness of her approach. The key is helping officers see people as individuals, not as stereotypes, Margaret explained. When that officer pulled me over, he didn't see a nurse, a mother, or a police widow. He saw only the color of my skin and made judgments based on that. The director of the FBI asked Margaret to consult on a new national training program they were developing. It was an honor she had never expected. While in Washington, Margaret also met with community activists who were working on police reform. They welcomed her perspective as someone who had connections to both sides of the issue. "You bridge worlds, Mrs. Wilson," one activist told her. "You understand the police perspective because of your husband and son, but you also understand what it's like to be treated unfairly. That makes your voice powerful." When Margaret returned home, she found a surprise waiting. The city council had voted to rename the street where the police academy stood. It would now be called Wilson Way. "This is too much," Margaret said when she heard the news. "I'm just doing what needs to be done." Chief Thomas disagreed. "You've changed policing in this city, this state, and maybe soon the whole country. That deserves recognition." The street renaming ceremony was attended by hundreds of people. Police officers, city officials, community members, and Margaret's friends from the hospital all came to show their support. Michael stood beside his mother as the new street sign was unveiled. Officer Donovan was there too, along with many other officers who had been through Margaret's training program. The mayor spoke about the impact of Margaret's work. What began with a single incident has grown into a movement. Mrs. Wilson took a negative experience and transformed it into positive change for everyone. Margaret was asked to say a few words. She looked out at the crowd of familiar faces. "This street is now named Wilson Way. My husband James would say that there is a Wilson way of doing things. It means treating all people with dignity and respect. It means seeing the humanity in everyone. It means using authority to serve, not to dominate." There was loud applause. Many people had tears in their eyes. "I accept this honor on behalf of my husband, who lived these principles every day of his career, on behalf of my son, who carries on that tradition, and on behalf of every officer who strives to serve with honor and compassion." After the ceremony, a young boy approached Margaret. "My mom says you help police officers be better. I want to be a police officer when I grow up." Margaret smiled at the child. "What's your name?" "James," the boy said. "Same as your husband." Margaret felt a lump in her throat. "Well, James, with a name like that, I think you'll make a fine officer someday." The boy's mother thanked Margaret for her work. "Things are better between police and our community. My son can dream of becoming an officer without me worrying so much about how he'll be treated or how he'll treat others." That night, Margaret looked at old photos of James in his uniform. "You're still making a difference through me," she whispered to his smiling image. "Your legacy lives on." 5 years had passed since that night when Officer Donovan pulled Margaret over. So much had changed since then. The Wilson Initiative had become a national model. Police departments across the country had adopted similar training programs. Margaret had written a book about her experiences and the lessons she had learned. Michael was now a lieutenant overseeing community policing for the entire county. Officer Donovan had been promoted to sergeant and worked closely with Michael on community outreach programs. Margaret continued to speak at the police academy, but now she wasn't alone. She had trained others to share their stories and perspectives. The program had grown beyond what one person could handle. On a warm spring day, Margaret was honored at a special ceremony at the state capitol. The governor presented her with an award for outstanding public service. "Mrs. Wilson has changed policing not just in our state, but across the nation," the governor said. "Her courage, wisdom, and compassion have made all of our communities safer and our police forces more effective." As Margaret accepted the award, she thought about how far she had come. From a frightened woman being ordered out of her car to standing on a stage being honored by the governor, life took strange and unexpected turns. "This award belongs to many people," Margaret said. To my late husband James, who showed what good policing looks like. To my son Michael, who carries on that tradition. To Chief Thomas, who had the courage to listen and make changes. She paused, looking out at the audience. And to Officer Donovan, who pulled me over that night. His willingness to learn and grow from that experience showed me that change is possible. Sergeant Donovan sat in the audience. He nodded at Margaret's words. What began as a negative encounter became the spark for positive change. That's the lesson I hope everyone takes from my story. We can't always control what happens to us, but we can control how we respond and what we do next. After the ceremony, many people wanted to speak with Margaret. One was a young woman in a police cadet uniform. Mrs. Wilson, your story inspired me to become an officer. I want to be part of the new generation of policing you talk about. Margaret smiled at the young woman. What's your name, cadet? Wilson, Mom. No relation, but I'm proud to share the name. Margaret laughed. Well, Cadet Wilson, I think you're going to do just fine. Later that evening, Margaret's family and friends gathered to celebrate. Michael, his wife, and their 2 children. Friends from the hospital where Margaret still worked part-time. Police officers who had become like family. And Sergeant Donovan, who had come so far from the young officer who laughed while pulling over a black widow. He was now one of the department's top trainers in community relations. Margaret looked around at the gathering. James would have loved to see all of you here together. Michael raised his glass. To Dad, who taught us what integrity looks like, and to Mom, who taught an entire nation. Everyone raised their glasses. Margaret felt tears in her eyes, but they were happy tears. That night, as Margaret drove home, she passed a police car with its lights flashing. It had pulled over a driver. Margaret slowed down, watching as the officer approached the car. The officer was respectful, keeping a proper distance, treating the driver with dignity. Margaret smiled. Maybe it was an officer who had been through her program. Maybe not. But things were changing one traffic stop at a time. As Margaret continued home, she thought about the badge that had fallen from her glove compartment that night years ago. A simple object that had changed the course of her life. James's badge, then Michael's, had always stood for service and respect in her family. Now that meaning was spreading to departments across the country. Margaret turned onto her street. Her heart was full. From tragedy had come purpose. From injustice had come reform. From one bad night had come years of positive change. Sometimes the most important journeys begin with unexpected detours. Margaret Wilson had never planned to become an advocate or an agent of change. But when opportunity knocked in the form of a flashlight beam and a fallen badge, she had answered. And that had made all the difference.